everyone. And again, thank you so much for being here with us today. My name is Pam Goins. I'm the Executive Director of the National Association of State Chief Administrators, or NASCA. We're so excited to have you with us today, to be with us for this virtual learning. We certainly would have rather been together in person to sit side by side and have these conversations, but under the world that we're living, we know that that's not possible. So we're excited to bring you a virtual experience, an opportunity to learn, to grow, to share, and to just experience new opportunities to find information from our states. So with that, let me introduce NASCA's President, Dan Kim, from the state of California, to bring some opening comments for us. Dan?
Thank you, Pam. Hi, everyone. Welcome to NASCA's Winter Thought Leadership Series. I'm Dan Kim. I'm the president of NASCA and the director of the state of California's Department of General Services. When the global pandemic began 8 months ago, none of us could have imagined that we'd be in the place we are now as we wrap up 2020. Many obstacles have been thrown at us this year. We've overcome them, and I think we're here to celebrate some of these victories today. NASCA is known for its intimate discussions around the work that we do in our states. And the Thought Leadership Series provides yet another opportunity for us to come together, to share and discuss the mountains of work and accomplishments we've all achieved over the course of the year, and especially since March of 2020. I highly recommend that you use this time to find and meet new colleagues, discover a corporate partner you haven't worked with before, and seek out innovative strategies from your colleagues. Now, these next several days will showcase multiple state reviews, learning labs from our corporate partners, and highlight our award winners. It'll also give us an opportunity to engage and network with our colleagues. Now, let me introduce you to Bob Oglesby from NeoGov, who will be introducing our keynote speaker. I want to thank Bob for your ongoing support of NASCA and for serving as a platinum sponsor of the Winter Thought Leadership Series. On to you, Bob.
Thanks, Dan. As Pam said, welcome, and Dan did too. Welcome to NASCA's Winter Thought Leadership Series, and this is the kickoff session. Pam and NASCA staff, I appreciate how you all can present, make everything feel so calm, even in all this chaos. I know it's frantic around there, but you do it with such grace. So thank you all for your hard work behind the scenes. Again, I'm Bob Oglesby, former State of Tennessee Chief Administrator and current Strategic Advisor and Thought Leader with NeoGov. NeoGov is the leading provider of an integrated HR, payroll, and talent management solution for the public sector, serving over 6,000 individual organizations. I appreciate the NASCA staff's levity with the conference title in reference to all this year's challenges. Most definitely, this has been a very highly unusual year. Unprecedented, uncertainty, other words come to mind to describe the current COVID-driven crisis. Some of those we probably shouldn't say. But I dare to say all of us have been challenged to think and work differently. During this series, as you heard, we will hear in a variety of session formats how numerous state governments have been resilient and persevered, rolling out new, never before attempted strategies, how they've adapted and incorporated new solutions, and how they deliver new processes, systems, and results, many of which are likely to stay in use long after this crisis. And so thank you and congratulations for all your great work. Before we hear from our keynote speaker, I'd like to provide a foundation for her talk by using this moment to speak to the importance of leadership and uncertainty. We all recognize the world in which we live is changing faster than ever. And because of such change, we now have access to more information, more technology, more mobility, which has been essential in enabling us to quickly pivot so more people can now work virtually anywhere and anytime. And while working remotely may have been implemented by the majority just to keep their employees safe and healthy, which obviously was paramount at the time and still is, most have found the opportunity to have other benefits as well. And even to the extent that I would expect many will agree, working remotely is likely to continue in some extent after this crisis. So how do we as leaders not only prepare for these challenging events, but maximize opportunities during times of increasing uncertainty? We all are familiar with the saying, never let a good crisis go to waste. Organizations need their immediate, most basic needs met by those managing the day-to-day, and they also need leaders preparing their organizations for both the near term and the long term. Crises accentuate the need for organizations to have very good managers and leaders, and quickly exposes those organizations who don't. Unfortunately, what most often happens with leaders during crisis crises is they fall into the trap of over-managing and under-leading. While there are lots of items leaders might need to be better prepared for tomorrow, I want to emphasize the importance of just two: your technology and your workforce. More specifically, I'm talking about increasing use of technology by automating any remaining paper processes, incorporating intelligence augmentation that complements human functions, and using data-driven decision-making. For those who have not seen the NASCA webinar, Driving Digital Transformation at Scale in State Government, I suggest you check it out. It's very well done. It was presented in February of this year by corporate partner McKinsey. The session includes survey results documenting where state governments are today, a case example, and more, all emphasizing why digital government is critical and valuable. I'm also stressing the importance of furthering the development of your workforce. This has risen to be a top issue during the crisis as well, as lots of organizations have struggled to quickly reskill and repurpose many of their employees. In addition to that, there is considerably more to be addressed in preparing your workforce for tomorrow. The good news is, just about 3 weeks ago now, NASCA released its latest research report, which addresses many of these needs. It's named Job 1 2020, Transforming State Government's Workforce for Tomorrow, and it's prepared by corporate partners Accenture and NeoGov. I encourage you to read the full report and watch the launch recording as well. It identifies challenges, opportunities, and recommendations on the topics of strategic workforce and succession planning, training and development, and performance management. Okay, let's quickly move to our keynote speaker, Julia Sanchez. While I only have time to give you a very abbreviated version of her exceptional credentials, I'm certain it'll be enough for you to understand why she is our keynote speaker. Julia was previously President CEO of the Canadian Council for International Cooperation and a candidate for the Canadian Parliament. She is now the current Secretary General of ActionAid International, which is a global social justice and women's rights organization working in over 45 countries for a world free from poverty and injustice. For perspective on the importance of Julia's role in leadership, let me share a little bit of what the chair of ActionAid International said at Julia's start. As we embark upon a new decade, the social challenges faced by many in the global South are becoming more pronounced. We are confident that Julia's leadership will galvanize the ActionAid International family to position ourselves for greater impact in achieving our mission. Now, what makes Julia even more valuable as our keynote speaker this year is that she started her current position on March 1 of 2020. So with that, let's welcome Julia and hear her story of leading in novel and exciting ways during COVID. Julia?
Thank you so much, Bob, for that wonderful introduction. I'm delighted to be with all of you. Thank you so much for this invitation. And I am going to start my timer and try to stick to my 20 minutes. So Scott, could you help me with the slides? Great. Thank you. So I decided to call my talk Leadership in the Time of COVID. Hopefully many of you are familiar with a Colombian author, magical realism author, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And he has a famous book called Love in the Time of Cholera. And why I want to tell you quickly about this, of course, I have Latin American roots. And my parents, who live here in Canada, in Toronto, I had not seen them since February. And when I went to see them in August, my dad had a sign at the door that was written by him, Love in the Time of COVID, and he had a little yellow flag. And the story is that I was so worried about my parents not having seen anybody since February until March. You know, they're at a certain age where they have to be hyper careful. And the minute I saw that sign, I understood that there was a silver lining, a big, thick silver lining. My parents are romantics, very much in love still after 60 plus years. And they were just enjoying a honeymoon of many, many months in isolation. They had each other. So, you know, that made me feel of how both at a personal and at a leadership level, professional level, there is a lot of silver linings to be found. And that's what I'm going to share with you today. Next slide, please. Scott, thank you. So ActionAid, very briefly, is a global federation working for a world free from poverty and injustice. As Bob mentioned, we have currently 47 national ActionAids. So ActionAids in different countries that come together to form this federation. We have ActionAids in Africa, in Asia, in the Americas, including in the US, and in Europe. We don't have one in Canada, which is kind of funny because I'm here stuck in Canada now. We have more than 4,000 actionators globally. So that means mostly staff, but also volunteers who are on the different boards of our national ActionAids and our international board. Of that 4,000 actionators, there are a group of 180 plus who are staff of the Global Secretariat, headquartered in Johannesburg, but we have staff working out of hubs in Nairobi, in London, and 24 other countries, including one person working in Canada, yours truly. So this was already the case before COVID, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And we work on women's rights, climate justice, and humanitarian assistance. Next slide, please. So the challenge. All of you have been challenged professionally and personally, I'm sure, in different ways. So I'm just going to try to situate what I walked into on March 1st, 2020, when I became the new Secretary General of this global federation. And I was an outsider. So I wasn't recruited from within. I was brought in from outside with a change mandate. It often happens when somebody comes from the outside that the organization feels that it needs change. So my plans of doing a world tour and starting in Africa, going to the Americas, Europe, and finishing in Asia at our annual general meeting that was supposed to take place end of June in Nepal, in Kathmandu, immediately shelved, of course. I managed, thankfully, to spend my first 2 weeks in Johannesburg. So I had flown to Johannesburg to start my first day of work, which was March 2nd, a Monday, at the head office. And I spent 2 weeks there and I had a ticket to come back. And while I was coming back, I realized I was coming straight into self-isolation back home in Ottawa. And that was the end of all my travel plans and ambitions. Now, at the same time, our key funding affiliates, so ActionAid globally is funded overwhelmingly by 3 countries, Italy, UK, and Denmark. So the first 2 surely will ring a bell for you. They were in the news. They were being hard hit by this pandemic early on. So from a financial perspective, we knew that our federation was going to be very hard hit because our funding affiliates were being hit so hard. My first email to the whole federation, unfortunately, was to announce a new health and safety directive in response to COVID, which included, among other things, banning international travel. This was in early March. Now, banning international travel for a global federation that implements projects all over the world, including humanitarian response during a humanitarian crisis, was a big deal. But it was necessary. And as Bob mentioned earlier, we had to think first and foremost of the health and safety, not only of the staff, but of the communities that we work with, that we wouldn't be exposing them. And shortly afterwards, we declared a red alert, which is the highest level, of course, for any global emergency that we're responding to. And we had 40 countries that of our members who put together plans for humanitarian response. Of the 47 countries, we had our main funders who were under lockdown and unable to fundraise easily, or as they normally did. So it really felt like we were preparing to respond to the biggest, most unprecedented humanitarian crisis we had ever faced, with a blindfold on and with our hands kind of tied behind our back. Next slide, please, Scott. So who would have imagined, not me, that I would be leading a global organization during a global pandemic from my home office or my living room in Ottawa? I love it that in your announcements for this series of leadership talks, you ask, did I sign up for this? Well, yes and no. Next slide, please, Scott. So when I came in, when I accepted this challenging and exciting job, which I really felt like I had been preparing for this job all my life, I knew it was going to be very challenging. And I was excited about that. I knew that they needed change. I knew that ActionAid was at a crossroads where it needed to make some radical decisions around the way it was organized, the way it was funded, the way it related to its mission. It communicated its mission. There was a lot of work to be done. And I was excited about that. But I did not imagine it would happen under these circumstances, of course. But COVID has, interestingly for me, and I suspect must be true for many of you, It has created a sense of urgency for issues that were already there, dysfunctionalities, things that needed to be addressed, all of a sudden have floated up to the top, have been magnified, and become that much more urgent to be addressed. It also helps to get everybody on side that change is necessary. So if there were people who were hiding their heads in the sand, who were able to get away with that, that is no longer possible, because the challenge that we're facing and what lies ahead is so starkly urgent. So if not now, when? It became very obvious that, people knew I had been brought in for change, but that mandate for change was reinforced. We needed to renew our business plan. We needed to restructure the organization, and we needed to rethink the whole federation. So COVID-19 in a way has acted as an interesting cover or a catalyst or a bit of an excuse to really drive that change agenda home. So that's been one of the silver linings that I found has really helped my integration into the organization and for me to tackle the mandate that I have. Another is, the just realizing all of a sudden, oh, there are different ways of doing what we do. So on the how, travel is the obvious one. I mentioned it already, the travel ban and all of that. So we've made some savings, which is kind of nice, but we've also had to learn to work, to continue doing our work and to do work that we had never done before, like this massive humanitarian response, multi-country response without traveling. And that has reduced our carbon footprint, which is a good thing for an organization like ours. It was a bit of a contradiction that we flew all over the place in order to do work that was sometimes challenging or trying to address climate change. So now all of a sudden we've realized, okay, we can do this. We don't have to be flying all the time. There are other ways. We've been forced to explore that. Also on the what we do. So one of the agendas in our sector that has been gaining momentum is something called localization. So how do we put the people on the ground in the communities that we're supporting on the driver's seat? Let them be the drivers of their own development, and us take more of a backroom function of supporting, facilitating, funding, but not being upfront. So we've been talking about this for decades now, almost, but having a hard time actually doing it. And now all of a sudden we have no choice but to accelerate that agenda, which is a positive and good agenda. But again, the circumstances have helped us to move forward dramatically in that direction. We're embracing flexible work arrangements. That was mentioned by Bob as well. Everybody working from home remotely. We already had a very dispersed team. And when I joined, we had actually hired some lawyers to help us figure out how do we bring back all these people to certain hubs, because we were a little concerned about legal liabilities, employer liabilities in so many countries. And now I'm like, wait, stop. Maybe we already had the setup that we need, and now we have to learn how to make sure it's all, it all works, but that we keep our staff globally. If people are going to be working mostly from home, we are a global organization, why not? So let's figure, instead of trying to clamp down on this, people spread all over the place, let's create a system that actually supports that. Finally, the biggest challenge and where huge opportunities came up is how do you build trust? So a lot of the issues that I knew I had to tackle, I knew revolved around lack of trust, some of the problems, challenges that had come up, and that I needed to rebuild trust between the different parts of the Federation, with the Secretary General, whoever that person was, with the Global Secretariat, et cetera. So how was I going to do that if I wasn't able to have face-to-face time with the members across the world? How would I get to know everybody, including my immediate staff, but all the members as well? So I've done it. I've been able to, in a very interesting way, level the playing field, because instead of traveling to, let's say, 10 of the 47 countries in my first 6 months and deep diving and getting to know them really well, I've actually spent almost equal time on Zoom and on Teams with all the country directors and all the senior staff of all the members across the Federation. So my understanding of the Federation is much more holistic and balanced, and hopefully fairer. But I think people also feel very appreciated that they've had, some of my attention in my early months, and that it's been equally distributed. So I think that's been helpful in my need to gain trust and to elevate the trust levels in the organization, even though that's probably not how I would have done it if I had been able to travel everywhere. Next slide, please. So here are some words that have been ever present in my attempts to tackle this very interesting environment and to stretch my leadership in new directions. So it's not only COVID, right? As you know, COVID has surfaced other things that were kind of bubbling below the surface, and because of the state that we're in, many of those have surfaced. The impact that COVID has is not on neutral ground, and so there are issues. And for an organization that works on social justice, many issues have popped up that I've had to tackle. So shifting power, just to choose a couple here. So shifting power. ActionAid has been talking and trying to walk the talk around shifting power. We shifted our head office from London to South Africa in the early 2000s as part of that process of saying, if we're an organization, a global organization that works with communities in the global South, let's get closer to them. Let's have most of our staff come from those countries. Let's make sure that they're in the driver's seat. So how do you continue that agenda when you have all the constraints that COVID has provided us? It actually becomes a very powerful agenda because, as I was mentioning earlier, putting people in the driver's seat becomes not an optional thing or a desirable thing, but a requirement when you can't move, when you can't send people to travel around the world. Self-care. This is part of what we call the feminist leadership principles. And self-care is one of the most important ones, I would argue, which is about making sure that you are taking care of yourself as a leader, but also that you're leading by example and making sure that all your staff are taking care of themselves and are being supported. So putting in place support mechanisms, psychosocial support, being mindful that people are working from home. Some of them have children that are not going to school, parents that are unwell, people who are getting sick in your immediate circles and unfortunately in some cases dying of COVID. How does that affect people's productivity? How do we support them to take care of themselves, create an environment where they can continue contributing to very meaningful work, but understanding the context that they're in? So walking the talk, taking care of ourselves to be able to take care of others as well. Working with multilingual and multicultural teams. I mean, this has been a reality, as you can imagine, for the Federation, working in, across staff in 24 countries, members in 47 countries. And yet, I think because of COVID, or because we weren't living in a COVID age, I am the first Secretary General to ever hold webinars in 3 languages. So when I have, town halls, I don't expect everybody to show up to the same town hall because, it's impossible time zone wise. So I'm able to have a French, webinar for our French speaking staff, a Spanish webinar for Spanish speaking staff, and then a couple of English webinars for the English speaking staff that are still the majority. So just giving people that level of comfort that they can be heard, they can express themselves in the same language, which would seem a very easy thing to do. Again, is one of those silver linings that I think, has become like an obvious thing to do in the context that we're in. Leading in uncertainty, going with the flow, making tentative plans, but not getting stuck on everything, and helping people to be okay with that, high level of uncertainty, and make plans, but not stick to them and not be too disappointed when our plans fall through or have to be changed because circumstances have changed. Checking in with people constantly, reassuring them that it's okay if they don't know what things will look like 2 or 3 months ago, because really none of us do. One of the very interesting challenges and things that I've been tackling is relevance. How do we remain relevant as a federation, as an organization, as a structure, federated structure in this rapidly changing world? On the one hand, we are so blessed, and I know this is true of every one of you, so blessed to be doing meaningful and necessary work. And I often think of people who have found themselves all of a sudden, not able to do their work because of COVID. There is more demand for our work, right? There is more demand for, the care economy, for humanitarian work for sure, social justice issues like anti-racism, inequality that were already there, all of a sudden are that much more significant for people as they're connecting the dots between how this crisis has impacted communities and the underlying injustices that are there. So our work is so relevant and important, and yet we have to do it in very different ways. We have to work with different partners. We have to work in different ways. So making those adjustments in order to remain relevant, because we have something so valuable to contribute. So to provide the teams and the staff with that motivation that we're doing something that's really important and really significant right now, but we have to do it very differently from the way we're used to doing it. So not to, to mitigate the discomfort of the uncertainty and the change, the rapid change, with that constant reminder that what we're doing is really important. It's important for people's lives. It's important for communities. And we need to, to find the way to continue doing it in these very changed circumstances. So again, coming back to those silver linings and giving people motivation, energy, enthusiasm about what we're doing, even though, we know that people are doing it in such sometimes stretched and challenging circumstances. So I'm looking at my timer because I could go on talking forever. I have 2 more minutes, so I will just finish by talking a little bit more about feminist leadership principles. This is something that ActionAid has been championing for a while now, and it's something we talk about a lot. And it's really useful in this context because we are able to talk about how do we listen to people? How do we behave as an organization in a more horizontal way, where we're respecting and being mindful and respectful of everybody's opinion, of everybody's state of mind, of where they're at. All these just very good sound, HR practices really, which allow us to be more in tune with our staff as they're navigating the very trying personal and professional circumstances. I was blessed to have my son home with me for an extra 5 months. I had already done my, empty nester grieving and all that. And all of a sudden, what a gift from COVID that his classes were online. He came back home for 5 months. He's gone again. But, people have been dealing with all kinds of positive and not so positive situations at home. So having an approach, which for us is this feminist leadership approach, where we are listening to people, we're being mindful of their particular circumstances, of what they're living through, with the anti-racism, that's flared up very much in the US, but has had repercussions all around the world, to really meet people where they're at, even if it's through Zoom, through Skype, through Teams, to hear them out and to just be mindful and understanding and empathetic as leaders, while we're pushing ahead, important delivery, but also change agendas, is a tricky balance, but it's possible for sure when you have clear principles to guide you in that. So I think I will stop there. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope some of this is relevant to your worlds as well. There's my timer. Thank you.
Right on time, Julia. Thank you so much for your comments. Everything so powerful, something that we all need to hear, and especially knowing that we all need to learn to stretch our leadership skills in so many different directions. So thank you. We do hope that you'll hang out as we bring in our state reactionary panel. But we really wanted to hear from you, Julia, from an international approach, really hearing how you were bringing together these different global countries around the pandemic. And now we want to bring it home to our states and really talk through the impact that we have seen on our own state chief administrators and your teams. So I'm thrilled to introduce our 3 state chief administrators who will be with us this afternoon. Dan Kim from the state of California, Jay Dardenne from the state of Louisiana, and then Brom Stibitz from the state of Michigan. And they're each going to share a little bit with you about their own leadership approaches and styles, and some lessons learned from the past 8 months. So Brom, let me turn it over to you and let you kick us off.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Glad to see so many people joining us for the session here. And Julia, thank you. That was a great session. Hopefully you can stick around, and if you have thoughts on these questions, please jump in as well. So thanks Dan and Jay for joining us. We just heard from Julia how she took over for ActionAid kind of right walking into this pandemic. And so, we heard how maybe she had all, plans. Here's how I'm going to approach this. and it all got dumped on its head. And, you know, you really have to, you know, we talk about act and adjust, and how do you make, you know, how do you react to the things that come up like this and be successful? So curious from Jay and Dan, given the pandemic, how has your leadership style evolved during this global health pandemic? You know, what have you had to change? And maybe if there are some things that absolutely weren't going to change, you know, how has that changed? So let's start with Jay.
Well, first of all, I would say you don't drown in the details. That's one of the things that I've been cognizant of, is that there's so much going on, and we have such a broad level of responsibility in the positions that we have. It's easy to get stuck in all the details. To the extent that you didn't designate or allocate a lot of your responsibilities to someone else, it was absolutely necessary to do that during the throes of the pandemic. Louisiana was one of the first hard-hit early states, like Dan's was, and Washington was, and New York was. At one point early in the pandemic, had more cases per capita than any place in the world. So we were dealing with it on really an emergency basis. And that necessitated my being a part of the governor's, what we call the war room, which was a very small group of people that were basically advising the governor and helping make the decisions during the height of the pandemic. We still meet regularly, but not quite as often. And so I had to rely even more on the people who have responsibilities within the organization. And for somebody who is interested in kind of following up on everything, you have to let go of some of those things. That was one of the changes, I would say, from my leadership style that I was forced to deal with and did.
Yeah, that's a great point. Dan, what would you like to add on this?
Sure. Well, to Jay's point, I think we both had to delegate. I basically delegated my job to my admin deputy, who did a fantastic job, while I moved over to the state operations center to work with our chief procurement officer on PPE purchasing and a bunch of other COVID response activities. So basically a new role there. The other thing is just dealing with uncertainty. You know, I like structure, I like processes, I like systems, but in this environment, we were in a position where I was not able to make decisions I typically would be able to make under my authority, because it would we had to have a more unified response. On the other hand, I was making decisions that I normally wouldn't be making decisions on behalf of the state. So just being more comfortable in both of those areas. And I think the third area, just I had to actually engage with my staff via media. So what we were doing is a lot of virtual town halls, and really almost becoming like a TV host or commentator. And that was very uncomfortable for me personally, but getting used to that was very challenging, but I think it's been rewarding.
Yeah, we've certainly moved to a lot of live videos with our team as well. You know, that's interesting to hear you say that, Dan. I had a very similar conversation with my team. It was, look, I'm not going to be able to be here doing the normal things that we do as many hours as I normally would. You know, thank goodness I had a real team of experts that I could delegate that to and say, hey, you might have, you know, in the past brought me 25%, you know, the top 25% of the issues. Now bring me the top 10, and I'm trusting you to do the rest of it. So, you know, thank goodness, to your point, we have good deputies. So following up a little bit on that, you know, if we're talking about how to be flexible with our leadership style, certainly, you know, you both have a lot of experience in that role as a leader. And so I'm guessing that there were some tools or maybe strategies or principles that you've developed over your career that you use to guide yourself in those uncertain times. So anything you want to add on that, Dan? We'll stick with you.
Yeah, like I said, I'm into systems and structure. I doubled down on governance. So at least within my world, I was the statewide leader for the Logistics Commodity Movement Task Force. We basically had developed teams, project management, Gantt charts. We just went whole hog on that, and it really created some kind of order, because there was so much chaos initially. And I think that really helped the team members understand, this is my scope, this is what I can do, and this is what I need to do by the end of the month. So that was, and I think that's kind of filtered throughout the entire department to kind of take more of a project management approach to things.
Yeah. Jay, anything you'd add there?
Well, you know, we're very used to dealing with crises in Louisiana. We're kind of masters of disaster, not in a boastful way, but just out of necessity, because we have hurricanes, we've had floods, and what have you. So we're dealing in a crisis mode, and everyone in the top tier of my organization is very used to me being at a different location than they are. A lot of my people were able to actually come into work because our building was otherwise empty. And so the top tier of leadership could actually spend time in the office building without being exposed or without exposing anyone else. And really that kind of helped because they were in a setting that enabled them to be able to do some things that they otherwise might not have done at home. And that was something that really helped us through the most difficult time of the pandemic.
Yeah, okay. So one of the things that we heard Julia talk about earlier, she mentioned how do you use COVID as a catalyst for change? And I think, we've had a lot of conversations about that with our peers in NASCA. And so, one of the first things that I did with my team when this hit, and this was especially with my IT team, we have IT in Michigan, was to sit down and say, we need to take a different approach. We take our policies and procedures very seriously. We want to make sure that we do things the right way. We want to make sure that, we're following all appropriate, statutes and legislation, et cetera, NIST, et cetera. But what I said is, what, right now we need to figure out how to allow the state workforce to continue to work. We need to send 30,000 people home tomorrow, and we need to figure out a way for them to be able to connect. And so if we have a policy or a procedure that's stopping us from doing that, we need to have a conversation about it. It needs to come back to this leadership team, and we need to figure out if we need, if you need me to sign an exception, we'll document the reason why, and we'll move forward. And there were a lot of things to do that because the overriding concern was the health of our employees and making sure that we can continue work. So I'm curious from both of you, were there formal policies, were there procedures, were there things that needed to be just kind of left behind because of the emergency? And what was your decision-making strategy when it came to, should we, maybe temporarily put a policy and procedure aside? So Jay, let's stick with you on that.
Yeah, you certainly had to ask forgiveness and not permission in some cases, particularly in the procurement area. We had already well-established emergency procurement rules that can kick in whenever you have a declared emergency. And that gave us a real leg up in some very serious procurement decisions we had to make very quickly. For example, in early days with New Orleans being one of the primary hotspots in America, we literally had to build out a hospital at the New Orleans Convention Center. And to do that, we had to engage several companies, and we did it under the emergency procurement provisions that we otherwise would not have used. We did seek several bids. We were very careful, at least reach out to several different companies, but it was, I got to decide tomorrow kind of a deal. Give us a number and we're going to make a decision very quickly. And so those emergency procurement provisions helped us quite a bit. Another thing that comes to mind is that we had you don't take desktop home. Some of our workforce did work from home, but it was a sporadic and very small portion of our overall workforce. And it was taboo to bring a desktop home. Well, that went out the window. We exhausted our supply of laptops that were available as quickly as the pandemic began. And we began authorizing people, just take your desktop, go home, keep working. We want you to be productive. We'll worry about that rule later on. And so, as I'm sure we'll talk about before we finish today, the evolution of working at home is going to be the most dramatic change, I think, that government, private business, and the world is going to experience as a result of this pandemic. And we were fortunately leaning toward that a little bit before the pandemic happened. And now that's going to be a big part of our post-pandemic evaluation and planning.
Yeah, we did the same thing with desktops. Not only were we allowing people to all of a sudden take them home, we were giving them checklists of, if you take your desktop home, don't forget your power cord, don't forget, this, don't forget that. And so, yeah, certainly. Dan, what are your thoughts on this?
Exactly the same points that Jay had. As far as construction, we had to build out alternate care facilities. We just built out a COVID-19 testing lab. It would have taken us 3 years typically. We did it in 3 months, and we had to basically suspend some requirements, although we have met all of the lab certification requirements and have that actually lab certified. Procurement, the same thing. Emergency procurement we are really proud of the way we do procurements, but we had to speed up the process and how to manage between the control and oversight we typically have versus the speed that we absolutely needed to have. And then telework, just completely, we were in the process of developing the statewide telework policy, which was 10 years old. We've been working on that for 10 years, or not 10 years, but a year. We basically just implemented it as temporary measures, and it's gone really, really well.
Yeah. Let me come back on a speed round on this for both of you. Yes or no? One big thing that we did that was always a no-no in Michigan is we're now allowing employees to take their desk chairs home. So yes or no, Dan? Desk chairs.
Yes.
We haven't had that. That's interesting. Nobody's asked to take their chairs, but maybe some of them did and we didn't know about it. Julia, her hand up. I think she wanted to weigh in here.
Yeah, please, Julia, jump in.
No problem. Thank you. Just a thought about, governments are known to be bureaucratic and have a lot of rules. Our sector, non-for-profit sector, is not lagging too far behind. And so I think it's interesting that maybe some of these policies, we're going to question them now, right? We're going to say, well, for this emergency situation, we kind of cut, made things faster and effective. Maybe we have to revisit some of these policies. And I just wanted to share on a governance level, ActionAid, because it's a federation, it's very governance heavy and very governance led. And so we have delegates from all the members meeting every year in a different country. So this year it was supposed to be in Nepal. A lot of expense, a lot of travel, a lot of motions and what have you being passed. And this year we had to do it virtually, and it was efficient. It was effective. People spent 9 hours, 3 hours, for 3 days, and we got all our motions passed unanimously. It was very effective. So I could see people kind of going, oh, it's nice to meet. This is actually really effective, right, in getting the work done. So I think it'll be interesting to see what kind of balance we strike when we go back and kind of question some of these policies that have been in place for a long time.
Yeah, that's a great point. How do we not maybe lose some of the progress that we made? How do we use this as a catalyst for longer term change? Julia, let me stick with you just for a second. And I'm just for all the listeners, I'm totally putting her on the spot here. She doesn't know this question's coming. But Jay and Dan and I just talked about, how do we use this as a catalyst for change? What were some of the policies and procedures that maybe had to go out the window, at least temporarily? But it's one thing for us who have maybe been with our teams for a while. We know the team well, we know the policies and procedures, we know why they're there. So it's a little bit easier for us to get comfortable with, oh, it's okay if we maybe for 3 months don't do that. But you're brand new to this organization. So how did you approach that?
Yeah, I think it's that, that using COVID as, the catalyst or the cover sometimes to really question things that has helped me. I think it would have been very difficult. A lot of these changes had to happen. A lot of these questions had to be asked. And I knew that coming in, but COVID has provided that platform where everybody is kind of going, okay, we can't do things the same anymore. So let's have a conversation about how they're done. So I think that's one. But the other is something that one of you referred to earlier about, contacting the team and the communication. I have monthly staff calls. And I've been told by the staff that the previous Secretary General, they never saw the previous Secretary General so often and so much, right? People out in the field, this. And so the circumstances have also made me in an odd way more accessible. So I am listening, but the staff know that I'm listening to them, right? And I'm trying to understand, where they're at and what things work and what things don't work. So there's a lot of dialogue with the Secretary General that there wasn't before. And again, this is because of COVID. I'm not sure I would have had monthly calls, but because I felt I couldn't go out and travel and meet them in person, I thought, well, I need to establish, a permanent way to have contact with the staff. So, it's had interesting positive repercussions, having to work within these constraints.
Yeah, that's interesting. We started, as soon as we moved to remote, DTMB, my agency, it's about 3,000 people. And we started doing every 2 weeks, we would just do a live video where, I would go on, I would talk for maybe 15 minutes and anyone could jump on. And I'd say about maybe half of the staff will jump on in any given week. And then we'll have some other people, from our comms team talking about other things that are going on. And we did this as how do we communicate more now that we're not in the office? But what we found out is people are telling us, keep doing it. eventually we'll go back to the office, but we want you to keep doing this.
Absolutely.
This
And for a lot of
communication.
that staff, I'm sure they didn't have direct access to you necessarily,
Yeah.
right? And so this is much more than they've had for sure.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. So I'm going to go back to Jay and Dan here. And so like we were just talking about a little bit, you know, we have this balance. We have employees that at least a lot of them are working remotely due to health concerns and safety concerns. And how do we kind of balance, you know, our employees that are remote and getting them the support and engagement they need, but also making sure that our citizen-facing functions continue to work efficiently. You know, so it's one thing to say we're going to send everybody home, but certainly we're all here to, you know, provide services to our residents and the people in our states. So how do we do that? How do we navigate that? Those kind of like two new needs as an administrator, Jay?
Most importantly, we told our managers, you got to manage. I mean, we actually said to people, okay, this is a real test now. You're going to have to manage people from afar. You're not going to be able to keep your eyes on them all the time, but we expect you to be a manager and to do what's necessary to make certain that they're accountable to you and that you're communicating with them and so on. We developed individualized schedules based upon the units or the departments in government to make certain they got their work done by having some people come in occasionally or once or twice a week, or rotating schedules so people were actually coming in some, being ever sensitive to health needs, and anybody who was at risk was not required to do that, of course. And we had a whole series of provisions that were applicable to people who had children at home who couldn't go to school, or they had to have daycare for, or they had health issues or whatever. But it was a real test of our upper and middle level management people to be able to make it work. And for the most part, I think we all probably would say we made it work. We don't know exactly, we don't have a measuring stick against what was good and what was bad. But for the most part, services were continuing to be provided. I'm sure most of you have experienced as well. It's been very popular with the workforce. So most of the workforce is clamoring to keep working at home. And we're right now balancing what we do to try and accommodate some of that need, but also getting back into the flow of coming back to work. We still have upwards of about 6,000 people in our workforce that are working from home most of the time. They're coming in some, but that's going to be something we're going to take a very, very careful look at. We've already got a group together working on post-pandemic, whenever that comes, evaluation of how we go forward.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. Dan?
Yeah, I think for both internally and externally. So internally, we provided a lot of tools for folks for telework. We put together a website that includes tools for supervisors on how to supervise, email or etiquette on Zoom and how to use Zoom. We provided even ergonomic evaluations that people could do, self-assessments. So a lot of tools were available. We created a website now. It's available for all state departments. We also created a really interesting dashboard that showed all the teleworkers in our department and how much gas we were saving and what the commute time savings were. So far today, we've saved 24 and a half years of commute time and 300,000 gallons of gas, which would have cost our staff $1 million. So I think that's really kind of promoting the idea of telework, but also given that we've provided all these tools, that's helped. In terms of our customers, this has been like I think folks have said, don't let a crisis go to waste. So we went ahead and we've been automating a lot of workflow. We've been doing a lot of electronic processing, and there's been some reluctance in different divisions, but we've gone whole hog. So one of the things we've done is all of our contracts that we review all the contracts that departments issue. All of a sudden, we just started doing electronically. There was some hemming and hawing before for the past year. Boom, we did that in a week. We're doing electronic plan review for our Division of State Architects that's reviewing all blueprints for school construction. All of that is done electronically. And we do electronic signatures for every other process. So it's really worked out well in many ways. But I've got to say, the divisions that have really done well had performance metrics to begin with. And I see that they can monitor their performance and see where there are gaps. And the ones that never had those metrics, the quantifiable metrics, are struggling a bit more.
Yeah, go ahead, Julia.
Yeah, just wanted to contribute a little piece of to round the conversation around staff working from home. So in the work that we do in communities in mostly developing countries, gender-based violence has gone through the roof. But interestingly, this is true everywhere. So in Canada, for example, for me, it was very interesting to be dealing with this overseas from here, but to be hearing our government here in Canada in the first package that they announced way back when in March or April, they included a lot of money for shelters, for women's shelters, because they knew it's documented that when there's this kind of crisis, you know, gender-based violence goes through the roof. So, you know, some of our staff, unfortunately, will be stuck at home with their abuser, right? And so, and people are tense, tensions grow, etc. So just something to be mindful of. You know, there's all those silver linings that I like to focus on as well. This is something that's very sensitive. So we've put in place some, you know, support, access to support for our staff, you know, anonymous and what have you, just so that they know that if they need to talk to somebody, there's a support mechanism in place to address this.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think a lot of us are struggling with, you know, if this becomes the new normal, and I think a lot of us think it will. You know, we struggle with how do we build and maintain those relationships at work, but what you're getting at is even something harder. How do we support our employees who don't have a way to get out of there? I want to go back to Dan, to what you said. You know, what we've seen in Michigan is, you know, like I say, you know, I spent a lot of my time on IT, and we've seen adoption of collaboration tools. We've had the fastest, smoothest adoption of some of these tools that we've ever had, you know, and it just so happens that, you know, we were ready with a new electronic signature solution. We were ready with to roll out Microsoft Teams for broader distribution. And so all these things, just the uptake has been phenomenal. You know, we could have struggled for a year trying to get users to adopt those things, and it went right through. I would also say, if you haven't seen California's dashboard, go check it out, to everyone on this call. It's pretty amazing. I will right here in front of everyone that I am blatantly ripping it off. You know, have the team working on that, and just, you know, looking at, you know, Dan, you shared the amount of time and gas that those folks have saved. What about the impact on the environment and that? And so we're really trying to show some of those benefits. So, you know, when the team asked what I wanted, I said, I basically want something as cool as Dan has in California. So thanks for sharing that, Dan.
Brom, related to that, we before the pandemic hit, or right before it, we were having serious discussions about, in the out years, going to a 4-day work week universally across the board for our employees who are all concentrated in downtown Baton Rouge, because we have an interstate widening project coming that was going to really put a huge burden on our interstate. And in our evaluation of this, we concluded that if we can move to this, we would be able to shorten the time that we would have temporary construction lanes from 3 years to 2 years, and we would save millions and millions of dollars on the construction cost. And the pandemic, looking at Julia's point, the silver lining is helping the workforce realize this will work. I can work from home, or I can only have to come in 4 days a week, and we'll stagger all that to make it work, but consistent with what Dan was saying as well. What a great idea about the gas savings and the impact on the environment. And this is related to what we were looking at pre-pandemic, and which we're now absolutely going forward with.
Yeah, no, that's great. So one of the things that we hear from when we talk with other NASCA members, other states, is, oh, everyone gets up in front of the group and they talk about all the great things they're doing, but really we learn more when we hear about people's mistakes, or we learn more when we hear, hey, I tried this and it didn't work, and here's, you know, how I pivoted and tried something new. So let's go there for a minute, and let's talk about maybe some things that didn't work or weren't as effective, and how you reacted to those. And I'll be the first one to share an example. In Michigan, we have a lot of flexibility with our procurement laws when it comes to emergencies. So we're a lot luckier than a lot of states. And we had a very clear, procedure set up with our emergency operations center to say, this is what happens. You know, a request comes into the emergency operations center, they, you know, thumbs up, thumbs down, comes to procurement, and then we don't always have to do a competitive solicitation. But what we realized was, with all the uncertainty in the markets for PPE, that model wasn't working. We couldn't wait for a county to ask for N95 masks, get to SCOC, come to us, because by the time you'd go to buy it, it was gone. And so we actually created a new structure for us to say, you know, kind of a streamlined, hey, we're going to buy 5 million masks, you know, based on this, you know, what we think the need will be. And that worked a lot better for us. So, you know, we basically just moved away, for the purposes of this pandemic, we moved away from the model that we had previously because it wasn't working. So curious from the panel here, what were the things that you found that weren't working, and did you find a good way to make something work better? Jay, I got you up on the screen. Do you want to?
Two things come to mind. The first was we could have done a much better job of creating a one-stop shop for dealing with people who were going to save the world with their product or their ability to take care of us. You know, we just got deluged like everybody did with who would sell us PPE for dirt cheap or who were going to provide something 24-hour delivery. And we had too many different people dealing with that at the outset. And we really didn't have the one coordinated person to deal with this onslaught of solicitations we were getting. We could handle the procurement part of making it work, but we needed a better way to try and manage all the people who wanted to come in and sell us something. Not to mention the competition that was taking place among states and with the federal government giving us mixed signals about what they were going to do and what they weren't going to do. Second thing I would point to, and we did not do as good a job as we could have done and should have done with communication within the government family, particularly the legislature vis-a-vis the governor. Like everybody else, we got a lot of partisanship going on right now in Louisiana, Democrat governor, Republican controlled legislature. We included the legislative leadership on a regular basis, but didn't really reach out to individual members as much as I probably could have in retrospect, that helped fuel some of the challenges we're facing now. We're in court this week with the legislature trying to undo the governor's executive order dealing with masking and social distancing and what have you. That'll play out based on a constitutional determination, but better communications may have helped dissolve some of that anxiety that was there that's now being played out in litigation.
Yeah. Well, all the best. Good luck on that litigation. Michigan went through the exact same thing. So. Yeah, Dan, you have thoughts on this?
You both stole my examples. So for example, as far as the legislation, right now they're conducting a hearing this moment on the legislature wants to be more informed and be part of the decision-making process. So to Jay's point, I think that's something that is going to be top of mind for the administration. The other point that Brom made as far as we had a bunch of requests, individual requests from departments, from counties for PPE, and that just wasn't working. We'd buy like 10,000 here, 5,000 there. We basically reformulated this so that we created a single team, a procurement team, and then we established goals. And we, like, for example, we established a goal for 500 million surgical masks. And we said, now we can do bulk purchasing and get lower costs. So that worked out well. Another example I want to share, though, is I'm a big fan of transparency. I love numbers. And sometimes I think to the detriment when you're talking about something as fluid as COVID. Oftentimes a number gets thrown out, like we had ordered a number of masks and everyone was touting that. The media picked that up. We were doing high fives and then the order fell through. And so we need to be very careful about kind of how do we publicize some of this stuff. And we've made a real conscious effort to distinguish between what we've ordered and what we've actually received. And we're really talking in terms of PPE that we've received as opposed to just what we've ordered.
Yeah, that was one of the weirdest markets we've ever dealt with, the PPE market there for a while. All of a sudden, everyone seemed to be a broker of PPE, didn't they? All right. Well, we're getting close to the end here, so maybe we'll end on kind of maybe a little lighter topic here, and we'll let Dan go first since we keep on stealing his thunder with our answers. So just to wrap this up, what's the most unusual request that you've gotten over the past 8 months?
So one of the things that I was asked to work with a vodka distillery and our California Prison Industries Authority to see if they can work together to develop hand sanitizers. That's one thing. But literally yesterday, I got this letter from a guy from the Jersey Shore who said he would sell me the patent for PPE. And his patent was very unusual because you can keep your mask on and eat. I think I'm going to decline, but if any of you are interested in this, I can give you the contact information. All right.
Sounds like a great investment opportunity. All right, Jay, most unusual request over the past 8 months.
Some of you may have seen the television show Swamp People, which originates in Louisiana, a bunch of interesting characters who are alligator hunters and what have you. The original swamp person is Troy Landry, who's still on the show, who's a friend of mine. And early in the pandemic, I got a call from him because there was a glut of crawfish they couldn't sell to all the Louisiana restaurants that were closed. This was seafood season, crawfish season, and he wanted to unload these crawfish. And it was a huge economic issue for a lot of the crawfishermen in Louisiana. And crawfish apparently were not eligible for SNAP or for a D-SNAP. And so he wanted to make sure crawfish would be available for D-SNAP, and lo and behold, we were able to make that happen. So a lot of the folks who were on the D-SNAP program were able to enjoy their Louisiana crawfish during the height of the pandemic.
That's great. I'll throw in one to wrap it up here. And just, you know, as I mentioned earlier, all of a sudden everybody and their brother was a PPE broker. So I would just say early on, we worked with, and they will all remain nameless, but a Hollywood producer to get PPE. We worked with a former NFL star to get PPE. And best of all, we worked with a former Real Housewife to get PPE. And I will leave it right there. So I'll wrap it up. I know I'm running a minute late here, Pam, apologize. Big thanks to Dan and Jay and Julia for joining us for this session. I love being able to have this kind of conversation. So thanks a lot. And we'll give it send it back over to Pam. Thank you.